Evening. Thank you all for being here. I always like to ask when I'm speaking at a group, how many of you have been affected personally by gun violence? There's a lot of people out there, some that I know well. Thank you for coming. Roxana Green's here. Her daughter was murdered on January 8th. Deborah Parker sitting next to her. Her 19-year-old daughter was murdered in Chandler. Lisa Kiser, who you'll hear from, she was at the nurses' shooting in Tucson. And you've probably all heard a lot of what I have to say. So I did this the other day for a poetry anthology that I was responding to. January 7th, about 4:30 p.m., a robocall. It's Gabby inviting me to Safeway tomorrow, 10 a.m. Come, talk to me. It's my Congress on your corner. After this contentious election, they'll be there to disparage her actions. I'll be there to temper theirs with heartfelt thanks and encouragement. January 8th, a perfect winter day in Tucson. Crystal clear blue skies seemed bluer with the white clouds. It's cool and crisp. 10 a.m. and she's late. 10 a.m. and she's nearly dead. 33 bullets, 6 dead, 12 physically wounded, besides and beside her. 33 bullets in less than 20 seconds. Second, number 20. The magazine is spent. Roger Salzgeber and Bill Badger, two good guys without guns, pursue and tackle. I'm flat on the sidewalk against the wall, without my life passing in front of my eyes, wondering about pain from bullets. He's tackled nearly on top of me. I can't reach the gun, but I can reach the loaded magazine in his left hand. Where are the deputies? She, the lady deputy, apologized that it took so long to get there. They wouldn't get out of my way, she says. How different so many lives were between January 7th at 4:30 p.m. and January 8th at 10:10 plus 20 seconds a.m. It happens again and again and again, everywhere, and thoughts or prayers are what they have to offer, even after it's one of their own. They say it's not the gun, it's the man. I tell them it's a very intimate relationship between the man, the bullets, and the gun. Very intimate. So we're all here with different causes, some of them overlapping, some of them multiple. Gun violence prevention is mine. It has to be after I was fortunate not to be physically wounded that day. It's my responsibility, imposed on me by myself, to be a voice for those who can no longer speak, to stand in the Senate and testify for those who can't speak, and to let those people hear what it means to be affected by gun violence. Martha McSally has been not only absent, she's been beyond absent. She voted recently for a Social Security amendment that President Obama put in place that kept mentally ill Social Security recipients from getting funds. It's contentious the way the addendum or the statement was made, but it was about mental illness, not about keeping people from getting their Social Security. So my question to Martha McSally is, when are you going to stand up for the people in your district, and actually for the people around the country? They don't just represent us. We are their main people they represent, but they represent everyone in this country. And Senator Flake, when he voted against the Manchin Toomey bill, I had the opportunity with another long-term gun violence prevention activist. We're not calling ourselves advocates anymore, we're activists. And although she has a little tiny voice for nobody, that nobody knows, and my husband says I should have been a drill sergeant, we had the opportunity to shout, "Shame on you," to those men. And we were detained for 2 hours for a background check. And you can get a gun, especially in Pima County, for no background check. 2 hours for a background check for shouting, no background check for getting something that shoots to kill. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. Stand up for your cause. If you don't have a sign the next time, Just write resist on your hand and stand there and resist what's happening.
You have to know first that I am at heart a nurse practitioner, and a nurse educator. And so when I wrote this, thank you, when I wrote this, it really was from the perspective of seeking wellness for all of us, which includes this idea of reaching out to her and asking her to be a part of that wellness. And so I will read to you what I wrote. With my glasses on. I lived through both a war and a mass shooting, so I know intimately what it means to feel utterly powerless and in desperate need of protection. In speaking to you, Representative McSally, I would first like to emphasize that I come to you today vulnerable and looking to you to act on my behalf and on behalf of this nation. We are in need of your protection. You have served this country well previously, and I'm depending on you to do so now in your role as a House representative. Perhaps you do not know, and there goes my light. Perhaps you do not know how much we need you. I will tell you, living through a mass shooting was much more difficult than living through a war because the violence was so terribly out of context and unexpected. On October 28, 2002, I was one of the students in the classroom at the University of Arizona College of Nursing when one of my classmates, Robert Flores, shot 2 of my professors to death. He had previously shot a 3rd professor to death in her office, and the shots from that shooting, as well from our classroom, were heard in the building. This was a classroom, not a war zone, but he blocked the exits, had 5 semi-automatic weapons, and over 120 rounds of ammunition. I was in the front row when he shot one of my professors to death, and I crouched under the table, my pencil still in my left hand, when he called out the name of my 2nd professor and shot her to death. A metal table with 4 legs will not protect you in a mass shooting. I had gunpowder in my hair. I had to physically pry the pencil out of my hand once I ran out of the room. The shootings at Sandy Hook were a turning point for me, and I think for a lot of us. I could not accept in any way that our children would be subject to such violence, let alone the rest of us. I began to work to reduce gun violence in the United States, and I insist as a survivor of gun violence, as a nurse practitioner, and as a health educator, that we address gun violence for the epidemic that it is. Every major health organization in the United States has declared it as such. This is not about politics. This is about saving lives. There must be a way to reclaim our homes and our communities as safe places. I look at your faces and I can tell you that is what we insist on. I really do not want to read the news someday that one of you is the victim of gun violence. And I'll just say, I'm going off script here, that Ron Barber was my friend and is my friend, and I knew him long before the January 8th shootings. You could only imagine what it felt like when I got the call that he was one of the people who had been shot. That is what the reality in the United States is. Okay, now I'll go back on script. So there must be a way to reclaim our homes and our communities as safe places so that everywhere we go does not become a de facto war zone with uncontrollable, unpredictable violence. There are real people behind these statistics, including me, and the pain, suffering, and loss continue long after the story has been reported in the news. Last week alone, I went to a movie on poetry and love, of all things. And in the midst of the movie, out of nowhere, one of the characters in the film pulled out a gun and threatened to shoot everyone. And there, 15 years after the shooting I survived, I instinctively crouched down in my seat and covered my head. It was the same position I was in 15 years ago. I left the movie theater shaken, bodily remembering what it felt like to be so completely vulnerable, like a child in need of protection. But that night I was determined to speak to you here, Representative McSally, and to be clear on how much we all need you, but especially our children. My question to you is this: are you willing and able to review the evidence on the reduction of gun violence and take evidence-based legislative action that will affect real change here in the United States? Specifically, one current measure to oppose is H.R. 367, which will seek to deregulate the purchase of firearms silencers. This bill, supported by the NRA and the Silencer Association, would increase sales and profits of guns while making it harder to detect the presence of gunfire in a public place, such as the school shooting I was in, such as the shooting that happened at Sandy Hook. This could well increase the number of casualties and lead to a delay of emergency personnel arriving to help. In the coming year, you will be faced with much proposed legislation around guns and gun violence reduction, and I strongly urge you to, and need you to vote to protect in ways that protect us and truly make us safer. Thank you.
One of the things I tried to do when I was researching was not to only research Representative McSally's positions, but also to research a little bit of who we are in CD2. So when I have information on that, I'll give that to you too. So on the issue of gun violence prevention, we'll start with talking about the NRA. The NRA conducted their own exit polling in 2014 that showed that the group was viewed favorably by 47% of CD2 voters and unfavorably by 40% of CD2 voters. That was a lower favorability rating that I was actually expecting, given that there's so much rural area in CD2. Representative McSally has a 93% rating from the NRA, identical to all the other Arizona Republican members of the House, and the NRA has endorsed her in her last two campaigns. On background checks, a 2014 survey of likely voters in CD2 showed that 86% think background checks for all gun purchases is an excellent or good idea. Current law exempts from background checks those who purchase guns from private sellers at gun shows or from individuals on the internet. Asked about this loophole, Representative McSally said, "That's not a loophole, it's freedom." And absolutely it needs to stay that way, because any restrictions on that at gun shows or other places is just absolutely unconstitutional. So again, we're going to put a little fact check in here. In D.C. versus Heller, the Supreme Court specified that laws intended to prohibit felons and the mentally ill from purchasing guns are, quote, presumptively lawful, end quote. There's another issue that's very important within the gun violence issue: concealed carry permits for domestic abusers and stalkers. The same 2014 survey found that 87% of voters in CD2 say preventing the sale of guns to domestic abusers is a good idea. Representative McSally has said that she has been stalked in the past. Quote, "I know what it feels like to worry constantly about when and where your stalker will appear next and what he'll do. I wasn't even safe in my own home or my car where my stalker broke in and held me in a hostage-like situation." On January 17th of this year, Representative McSally signed on as a co-sponsor of H.R. 38, the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act of 2017, which would force every state to recognize concealed carry permits from every other state, thereby making the state with the weakest permitting standards the law of the land. Currently, at least 30 states and D.C. and District of Columbia deny permits to boyfriends convicted of domestic abuse and/or subject to restraining orders. 27 states and D.C. deny permits to convicted stalkers. H.R. 38 would override those states' laws.